you, Matt, when you look at what Duke has been able to do, I know they've been playing off-collar teams, if you will. That's probably the wrong word to use, but off teams that you would expect that they would win. But the point is, Duke is playing some really good, solid basketball, and they played a very good game against Texas Tech. Duke is going to be another one of those teams that we're talking about in the Final Four this year in March, unless I'm proven wrong. Duke is the equivalent of the Alabama in football right now in basketball.
Well, the thing, though, that Duke's doing, though, is they're starting to show a side like Kentucky is, and that is gambling on one-and-done players. I mean, with a revolving door roster, being able to build continuity and being able to upstand the pressure in the tournament is a question mark. I mean, remember, this is a Duke squad that, in this kind of format, has lost to teams like Lehigh, Mercer. I mean, this is not a slam dunk here when you gamble on one-and-done players like Duke does, Kentucky does, and I think to a case Indiana is doing with Romeo Langford, you run the risk of being embarrassed. And I think if you're looking for a team right now that is a threat, I would say right now the team I think that is the biggest threat at this point to possibly win a national title is not Duke. I would say it's someone maybe like a Michigan, who is undefeated right now.
Rick, what are your thoughts on Duke? I mean, you can't rule out Kansas either. Obviously, Kansas is number one, Duke number two, Kansas 9-0, and Duke 9-1, and you've got Tennessee hanging out around right there at number three, and certainly a Big Ten team, Michigan at 11-0. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Matt. You rely on talent, a lot more because there's no experience when they're one and dones, right? We saw Duke lose to Gonzaga this year already anyway because experience is what got Duke beat in that game. Gonzaga has a lot of experience, and I would say Gonzaga is a big threat too. They just beat Denver by 61 points yesterday. So I'll say Kansas and Gonzaga, Michigan, all three are huge threats to Duke this year.
And then, Rick, question. You talk about those mid-majors, Buffalo and Furman. Both of them thoroughly whacked last night. Out of the realm of undefeated, Buffalo losing by 20 to Marquette, Furman losing by 20 to LSU. Are we off the bandwagon of those two schools at this point?
Yeah, I think so. You can't take a loss like that and then still be serious contenders, I would say.
Guys, let's talk a little bit about a big rivalry, and that they're not necessarily playing each other this week, but Indiana and Kentucky. Kentucky ranks higher than Indiana in the AP poll, but yet Indiana has a better record. Yet Kentucky has scored more points. We'll start with you, Matt. Certainly, Kentucky, Indiana, big rivalry. It's good to see Indiana finally ranked again. I'm kind of shocked to see that Kentucky is ranked number 19 and Indiana number 22. I'll take that, especially with Indiana. I'll take it all day long, every day. But it's concerning to me to see Kentucky ranked so low. Are we beginning to see an end to a dynasty with the Kentucky Wildcats?
Again, like I said, that is the risk you take when you have a revolving door roster where you do not have any continuity. You are always kind of just throwing the dice and hoping you don't throw craps. And the last couple of years when they have gone that strategy, Kentucky has thrown craps. Now, I don't think it's going to affect them when they play Indiana, but I think when you look at some of these other tournament teams, there is a reason that they fell out early in last year's and this past year's NCAA tournament because the continuity is there and you're relying on a bunch of freshmen to get the job done for you, and sooner or later it's not going to work out. And I think more times than not, they will get their championships here and there, but they will not be a consistent Final Four team like they were when they had more of a continuity on their roster. And granted, dare I say, with people like Pitino, Tubby Smith as the head coach, as opposed to John Calipari.
Rick, what are your thoughts on where Indiana and Kentucky are? Kentucky obviously following in the ranks, but we're also seeing Indiana finally being ranked. Kind of concerned that Marquette is ranked a little bit higher than Indiana because Indiana did a pretty good beating to Marquette, but at least Indiana's on the way up. It seems like Kentucky's on the way down. I know if we're an IU fans, as we are, we're okay with that, but I ask you the same question just ask Matt. Do we see an end to a dynasty with the Kentucky Wildcats?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that the landscape of college basketball might change with these one and dones. I think there's some rules or rumors of rule changes coming along. I don't think it's an end to Kentucky whatsoever. I mean, it's still Kentucky. It's one of you could arguably call it the most elite basketball program. Really, it's the dream job of all coaches. Outside of Duke, maybe North Carolina. I don't think it's an end of a dynasty at all. Every team has its ups and downs, and I agree with Matt. The one and dones, they create no continuity for anybody, so there's a lot of uncertainty year in and year out, and maybe that affects these rankings somehow. And I don't know. I guess Kentucky has a worse record than IU, but ranked higher. I don't have who they beat in front of me, but I know if they play stronger competition, that would probably be the reason for that.
Matt, let's talk a little bit about this FBI investigation. It seems to have disappeared, but it has not, as we saw some indictments come down just a few weeks ago. How big of an issue is the FBI scandal, or we won't call it the FBI scandal, we'll just call it the NCAA scandal. I certainly am a firm belief that if we're going to start paying people, just let them earn their money and let's go on. I could care less if they drive a nice car or if they have a good shoe deal or if a shoe helps out a school. I could care less. I think the FBI has outstretched its limits. I think they should not be the policy police for the NCAA. The NCAA should make some rules and stick by it. I don't know that we have anything that should be illegal, but apparently is illegal. And so let's talk a little bit about this FBI stuff that seems to have disappeared out of the news line. But as we've seen just a couple weeks ago, they're still very active in the investigation, and indictments were passed.
Well, the thing is, though, if you're going to pay players, how is that going to influence Title IX? Because, I mean, there's multiple things going on with Title IX where male student athletes are challenging the validity of Title IX, trying to wipe out the protections on Title IX, which I think is a very disgusting behavior. Whatever they're trying to do with that, I think, is in very poor taste. And maybe that's part of the reason why the FBI is cracking down on this stuff, to protect Title IX. At least that's what I think is the motivation for it. Because, remember, if you're going to pay the male athletes, you're going to have to pay the female athletes as well, because otherwise that Title IX violation is going to come into play. And for the fact that I think you have all these male student athletes attacking Title IX, I think it's a very grotesque behavior in my opinion. And it is not signed well for – I mean, this isn't about amateurism. This is about protecting the ability for female athletes to compete at the NCAA level and be able to do it without any prejudice. And I think this is total prejudice, that we have all these people trying to take a stabs at Title IX and trying to wreck the future of the female student athlete. I think that's the thing that's going on here, and that's unfortunately kind of getting shoved underneath the rug, but I think it's something that needs to be taken a focus on as to why the FBI is cracking down here, because remember, the gender inequality thing is a big deal here, and I think if you start cracking and start siding with the athletes and paid players, all of a sudden all that work you've done for Title IX kind of goes down the drain, which I think is unfair to the female student athlete that works just as hard as the male student athlete.
You know what? There's some merit to that argument, absolutely, and we do a lot of times we forget about the female athletes who, when we talk about women's basketball. I mean, obviously, some great athletes in Tennessee and University of Connecticut and so forth. So I could see merit to that. My point is not just female athletes. I mean, you're going to have to start paying people across the board. Are they playing field hockey? Are they playing chess club? Or anything, if they're associated with the NCAA, they might be entitled to some compensation. One would think if you're just having a across the board rule. Rick, will give you the final word, sir.
Well, I didn't know what FBI investigation you were talking about, actually, so I'm just going to take a pass on this one. I thought you were talking about
it's the same FBI investigation that's been going on for a couple of year and a half.
Yeah, I'm just saying about that.
Well, that's my point. That was my point of bringing it up. We seem to have forgotten about it, but it is still very much going on, and we saw some indictments, and we've even seen at least two jail time sentences handed down. I know within the most recent months. So it's just a conversation.
I think we talked about this a few months ago, and I just thought the whole thing was a big joke because we see the indictments getting handed down to people you've never seen or heard of or have really no impact or anything. You're talking about the 2 or 3 guys indicted for Adidas, right? That investigation?
Yes. That's just part of it.
I think the NCAA on that matter anyway is all this stuff has came out and made public, so the NCAA wants to, in the public eye anyway, make it look like they're doing something about it. But they're doing it in a way to where they're not losing a dime over anything, you know. So to me, it's like a big joke, you know. It's just a big joke and investigation.
Then you talk about big jokes. What about you talk about Virginia being undefeated again? But is there any way for really Virginia to gain any respect, considering we are still several months removed from them losing to UMBC? I mean, is there any ability to be able to respect the team, even though they've got a lot of talent, mind you, and Ty Jerome, Kyle Guy, but is it possible to respect a team that made history that you really don't want to make last March, or is that old news at this point?
I don't think it's old news. I still think you have to give respect to a team like Virginia so far. We just knew that a 16 beating a 1 was going to happen at some point. It was going to happen. Unfortunately,
yeah, but not beating one by 20 points, though.
Yeah. That's right. The way it happened was crazy. I'll still I won't give Virginia a pass, but I would just say we knew that was eventually going to happen, and I'll give Virginia some credit. If they could bounce back this year, make it to the Final Four, would that make that if that ease the pain a little bit, maybe?
The thing, though, that makes it tough, though, for Virginia, Todd, though, is can they play a style where the game gets out of hand and teams start scoring against them? They clearly couldn't do it against UMBC when they scored 74 and gave up 53 in the second half. That's the thing. If one of these teams could figure out how to put points up against Virginia, I think the Cavs could have a lot of trouble in the ACC play, especially if a team like North Carolina or Duke could find a way to put points in the basket.
Well, we'll see what happens today. They play W&M or something like that, WM. So we'll see what happens with them. Well, guys, we got to leave it there. I believe it's William and Mary. Yeah, I've went past that screen, but I think it was William and Mary. But any which way, guys, we're going to put a cap on this conversation because we're going to be jumping into the NFL playoff preview. I'm going to be at this big game tomorrow with the Colts and the Giants.
Don't forget about my Bears. They're legit.
Oh, yeah, the Bears
they look
legit,
really
absolutely.
good, Matt. They look really good. I'm a Lions fan. I'll acknowledge that they look really good.
All right, guys,
well,
so
again,
many...
like I said, though, if you want to blame anyone, blame the Raiders for giving up Khalil Mack and us getting him. If you want to blame someone for them being good, blame John Gruden.
And, you know, here's a scenario, guys. There's a lot of scenarios that are out there. But if you're a Colts fan, you got to be hating the Baltimore Ravens right now. You got to be rooting for the Chargers. You also need a little bit of a help from the Pittsburgh Steelers to get a win. Because if the Steelers win, the Titans win, the Colts win, and the Baltimore Ravens lose, that takes care of the Baltimore Ravens. And for the moment, we will move into that bottom seat with the Indianapolis Colts, that scenario happening. But we're going to be breaking down all of those scenarios. Adam Jividan, our super fan for the Cleveland Browns, is going to be joining us as well. He's going to be talking with us a little bit about how the Cleveland Browns can still get in the playoffs. And who would have thought that was actually going to happen? It's probably not a possibility. But
so at this point, is it a lock, Baker Mayfield, for Offensive Rookie of the Year?
I think so, yeah. He would have my vote, that's for sure.
I know there's Saquon Barkley out there, but I just think Baker Mayfield's meant a lot more to the Browns than Saquon's meant to the Giants.
Especially considering you're talking an 0-16 team that actually at one point was in an outside chance. Now, not great a chance, but an outside chance of making the playoffs. So that's a huge turnaround for them.
Definitely.
Well, we'll certainly see what happens. Rick, you want to stick around? You got to go. Matt, you want to stick around? You got to go?
I got to rock and roll. We got a lot of stuff coming up. CBS Sports Classic, and then, of course, Saturday NFL. So a lot of stuff coming up this afternoon.
All right, guys, we'll be back on the flip side with Adam Jividan, a super fan of the Cleveland Browns, and then Ed Kratz at the top of the hour. We're going to be breaking down this NFL picture, all the scenarios, and what it